India's air crash investigators have released their preliminary report on last month's deadly Air India crash that killed 260 people. The report points to cockpit confusion after both engine fuel switches flipped off shortly before the jet crashed, starving the engines of fuel. And Johanna Wagstaffe is here to help us understand this report. Joe, you've had the chance to go through the report. What are your takeaways?
Yeah, Chris, it just came out a couple of hours ago, but the big takeaway here is that fuel was cut off to both engines just after takeoff. Let me take you through exactly how this happened. So 3 seconds after liftoff, the fuel shutoff switches, 2 of them, were moved from the run to cutoff, almost back to back. Shortly after that, the cockpit recorder picked up a conversation between the pilots, one asking the other why they cut off the fuel, the other one saying, I didn't. 10 seconds after those switches were moved to off, the pilots moved them back to on, but almost immediately after those switches were turned off, the engines would have slowed down. We are able to see that the engines, after they were turned back on, one of them began to heat back up, but Chris, it wasn't enough time to regain that thrust. The Mayday call was made, and a few seconds later, the plane crashed. We also know that the pilots were experienced, and this does rule out a lot of the other speculation we had a month ago. We know it wasn't a bird strike, no major engine failure, and this wasn't a flaps issue.
Yeah, I mean, such a significant finding, but still leaves so many questions unanswered. So where does that leave us in terms of trying to understand what might have happened?
Yeah, it does leave us with 3 main scenarios. You can actually see here this little sort of dot on the bottom of the plane. This was something that people had pointed to a month ago. This is called the RAT, which is basically an automatic motor that drops down during engine failure to regain power. We can also confirm that was deployed. But the 3 main scenarios we're left with were these switches deliberately turned off. This is a look at the cockpit of this aircraft, this Air India aircraft, and the fuel control valve switches are down here, the left and the right engine. It's not easy to turn them on and off. You sort of have to use 2 fingers to pick the switch up out of a gate before either putting it into the on or off position. So the second scenario that this was an accident is less likely, but as pilots maybe went through their post-takeoff procedure, this was around the time that they would have dropped or lifted the flaps back up. Perhaps there was an error, but again, it's quite a deliberate maneuver. I do want to focus on the third scenario here, which is that those switches were not locked in their gate prior to takeoff. And back in 2018, the FAA did release a bulletin for this type of aircraft for a possible issue with that locking mechanism. It was a voluntary inspection that they put out in their bulletin that airlines look at this locking mechanism. Air India did not perform that procedure. But Chris, if this was the case, I'm surprised that we haven't seen a big emergency bulletin go out immediately. Lots of questions still as we see this first preliminary report. The final one might not be out for over a year.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for that, Joe.
You're welcome.